This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.
Welcome to implementing SmartFactor Authentication. We're going to be looking into each of the components that make up our OneLogin SmartFactor Authentication feature. In our first video of the series, we want to go over what components make up SmartFactor Authentication. We'll also discuss Vigilance AI and how it is used to generate risk scores that are used by several other components within SmartFactor. Then we'll take a look at these main components that use the risk score, Smart MFA and Smart Access. Our second video will look at how to use non-standard login flows called smart flows. Enabling these non-standard flows for new users can be tricky. So in our third video, we'll look at how to use smart hooks to help us. And finally, the last video of the series, we will look at two other components, dynamic password blacklist and compromised credential check. These help you protect users from using credentials that have already been compromised. But first, let's be clear as to what SmartFactor includes. SmartFactor Authentication includes 6 components. An AI engine that tracks user login behavior and generates a risk score that reflects how close to the user's normal login behavior each login attempt using that user's credentials is. Smart MFA uses the risk score to suppress MFA prompts if the behavior is close to the user's normal login behavior, while Smart Access will actually deny login attempts that are significantly different from the normal login behavior. These components would be called adaptive authentication in general industry terms. Smart flows give you the ability to choose custom login flows, such as a passwordless login flow that does not even prompt for a password, or a brute force defense flow that prompts for MFA before it prompts for a password. The last two components are dynamic password blacklist, which can prevent users from specifying passwords that include their name or the company name or commonly used passwords like password123, and compromised credential checking, which compares the password or the combination of username and password to a list of known credentials that have been hacked and prevents users from using them as well. One of the core components that comes with SmartFactor is OneLogin's Vigilance AI engine and the ability to generate risk scores that reflect how risky a login attempt is based upon a user's normal login behavior. When a user logs into OneLogin, the context of their login is tracked. Their location information, device they are logging in from, the browser they're using, and other details like time of day. The Vigilance AI engine takes all this information in and forms a typical login behavior profile for each user. If a user changes their behavior over time, the profile will adjust to their new behavior. This profile is compared to a user's login context each time they log in. Based upon how close the login behavior is to the normal login behavior, a risk score is assigned to the user's login attempt. The closer to norm, the lower the risk score. Further from norm, the risk score goes up. This risk score can then be used for various purposes, like determining whether or not a user needs to be prompted for MFA, or perhaps denying the login attempt altogether. When a user logs into OneLogin for, say, the first time, there is no profile of their normal login behavior, so nothing to compare to. The risk score would have then, of course, be high. In fact, we don't even show the risk score for the first login because it's meaningless at this point. But you can see most of the information here that's gathered based upon their login attempt. As the user logs in again and again from the same machine, using the same browser at the same time of day, etc., their normal login behavior is determined and the risk score goes down. If the user logs in, say, using a different browser or from a different location, the risk score will increase. Smart MFA and Smart Access are two components of SmartFactor Authentication that utilize this risk score. Smart MFA looks at the risk score, and if the risk score is close to the user's normal behavior, it suppresses the MFA prompt. Meaning, if the user is required to provide MFA based upon their user security policy, they will not be prompted for MFA. Basically, the user's behavior is considered an additional authentication factor. This can make life a bit easier on the users since they don't always have to worry about MFA, while it still ensures that the login is secure through MFA when the attempt is outside normal behavior. Smart MFA is enabled from the User Security Policy MFA tab. If you have SmartFactor Authentication, you'll see the option at the bottom of the tab. Simply check the checkbox to enable and choose the risk score you're comfortable with. The risk levels refer to the actual risk score of the login attempt. There are 4 options: minimal, low, medium, and high. Minimal means the risk score is somewhere between 0 and 5. This means you have minimal risk tolerance, and your users will be prompted for MFA if their behavior is only slightly different from normal. Low means the score is 25 or less. A little more tolerance for risk, but not by much. Medium means the score is 50 or less, and your risk tolerance is just a little bit higher. And of course, high means the score is above 50, and your tolerance for risk is also high. So let's replay that risk score flow with Smart MFA enabled. The risk level is set to low, so the flow will change when the risk score is 25 or below. Again, the user logs in for the first time, and the risk score will be high because there's no normal behavior to compare it to. They're prompted for MFA. They log in again and are prompted for MFA, and the score goes down. They log in again and again with the same behavior and are still prompted for MFA. Their score keeps going down. Finally, their score is down to 20. Smart MFA now kicks in, and this time they will not be prompted for MFA. If their behavior changes slightly, their risk score will increase. And if it's over 25, they will be prompted for MFA once again. Let's check out Smart MFA at work. All right, let's check out how we can go about configuring Smart MFA and how it might look to our end user. So I've got phone with OneLogin Protect over there to the right. That's going to be my MFA option here. And we are going to go into the OneLogin admin UI. And we're going to go create a new security policy that has Smart MFA enabled. So we will call it Smart MFA. So we understand what we're up to here. And we're going to go over to the MFA tab. And we want to require MFA, otherwise suppressing the MFA doesn't make much sense. So let's go say OTP auth required here. We're going to say OneLogin Protect is what we're going to use. We're going to allow our users to register the MFA device when they first log in. So the user that will be testing will have to do that because we're going to have them be logging in for the first time. And then we want to make sure that this is going to apply to everyone. So basic MFA requirements set up here, and then we're going to say suppress if risk is equal to or less than, and we're going to choose the low level here for now. Okay, so that's all we really need for the user policy. Now, for testing purposes, we're going to apply this policy manually to the user in reality, when you put this into production, you're going to want to make sure that policies are usually applied using a mapping where it basically, looks at user attributes, and if the user matches certain criteria, we'll make a change like assign them to a group, then thus to a policy. But for now, we're going to go manually assign this to one of our users, and we're going to pick my friend ransomware because I find that amusing today. And I'm going to go into authentication over here, and I'm going to choose the Smart MFA policy. Now, ransomware has never logged in before, and ransomware is going to have to now register that MFA device because it's going to be required for him to log in the future. So let's go log in as ransomware. I'm going to open up different browser over here. We are going to go to our OneLogin instance, type in ransomware at demo.com, type in the password that hopefully I did not fat finger, and two-factor again is required. So we're going to begin setup. We want to bring up our phone here. We are going to click the little plus button. We are going to scan the code. And we have registered. And ransom is in. All right, so ransom is now logged in the first time, obviously had to register. Let's go check out that login event and the risk level that was scored for ransom. So he logged in over here, and we can go and see. Oops, wait a minute. There we go. Here's where we registered, and he was able to successfully log in. Now we're going to go and log out as our friend ransomware and do it again. Ransom.ware at OneLogin.com. Click continue. Password. Oops. Type. Oops. In demos, it's always nice to type the actual correct username at demo.com. Thank you very much. Click continue. And there we go. All right, so we should be prompted once again. We are going to say yes. And we got in. Voila. All right, so let's refresh over here on the events. And we can see now that we've registered, we've got OTP and our score is 50. So let's see what happens. We're just going to log off and log back on a few different times. So I'm going to log out again. Where OneLogin. Keep doing that. Continue. Provide MFA. That was successful. We got in. We're going to log out. Let's refresh over here because it's fun to see the score go down. Now we're at 32. Okay, let's knock a couple of these guys out. And eventually what we're going to go for is getting down to below 25. Remember, that's what we're looking for. And of course, fat fingering is always fun. Keep getting prompted, right? It's getting to know my usual behavior. And where at ammo.com. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Continue. You'd think logging off and logging back on would not be so complicated multiple times. Oh, what happened there? what happened? It didn't prompt me for my MFA. So let's go back and look. I'm going to refresh these events. And here we can see we got, again, 50. We started off with 32, 26, and now we are at 20. We are below 25, that threshold. Therefore, it did not prompt me. It suppressed the MFA request. And that is Smart MFA at work. Now, Smart Access works at the other end of the spectrum. It's all about denying access when a login attempt is outside of the normal behavior. Thus, it reduces threat exposure by detecting when the attempt is risky. It can also be applied not just to the login requests in the main portal, but also to login attempts to particular applications. You can enable Smart Access for portal logins by modifying the user security policy. Same tab you went to enable Smart MFA. This time the option's just at the top of the MFA tab instead of the bottom. Risk levels for Smart Access are high, over 50, medium, between 26 and 50, and low, 25 or below. So again, let's replay that risk flow with Smart Access enabled. So risk level is set to high. So the login attempt will be denied if it is above 50, unless it's the first time the user is logging in. So the user logs in for the first time, and the risk score will be high because there is no normal behavior to compare it to. But since this is their first login to OneLogin, they will be allowed in. They log in again, and the score goes down. And again, and again, and again, same behavior. Their score keeps going down. A login attempt is detected, and it's very different than the normal behavior that has been established. Let's say a different browser, different location, time. The score jumps up past 50. Smart Access now kicks in, and the login attempt is denied. Now let's take a look at how Smart Access works. All right, so now we want to test out what happens if we start acting outside the norm. Okay, we sort of established this norm for our user ransomware. We were able to lower that risk score enough so that the risk score was below the threshold that we set for Smart MFA, which initially the threshold that we set was 25 or less. Once we hit below 25, our user wasn't prompted for MFA. So now we're going to change the behavior just slightly and hopefully enough to kind of trigger it so that it does prompt for MFA. Okay. Now, in order to make sure that we really do kind of trigger this behavior to increase it just enough, I'm actually going to change my risk level here to minimum or minimal. So it's really looking now that this risk score has to be like 5 or less. Okay. So really any slight behavior change should give it a score above 5 and thus ensure that our user is going to be prompted for MFA. This is really sort of the safest option if you're choosing to use Smart MFA. So our user had been logging in primarily using Safari so far, so we're going to play with Firefox at this point. And let's go log in and see what happens. So Mr. Ransomware there, and type in the handy dandy password. No, please do not save it. And we got prompted. Awesome. So we go and accept, and our user should be logged in. Beautiful. That's what we expected. Okay. And let's go check out, in fact, what the risk score was. And we can see it was 24. So actually it was a really good call to change it down to the minimal level, right? So it wasn't enough if I had been using low level to have triggered enough of a change in behavior to trigger the MFA. But by changing risk level down to minimal. That meant I was looking for a risk score of 5 or less. Only if it was 5 or less would I have not been prompted for MFA. In this case, changing the browser only increased me slightly, okay, up to 24. And that was then above that minimal level. If I kept it at low, it wouldn't have gone above the 25, and I still wouldn't have been prompted for MFA. So cool. We've got that, right? So again, MFA, above or below that threshold, below the threshold, not prompted for MFA, above the threshold, and prompted for MFA if I have Smart MFA enabled. Now let's go enable Smart Access on top. So we'll go modify same policy here, but now click on deny access if the user meets or exceeds the selected risk level. Now, in a production environment, I would typically probably want to keep this closer to high. So I'm looking for scores like 75 and above to really deny access. But what we're going to do is go for low here. So again, hard for me to totally, get different behavior. I am going to log in from a different machine. It's a virtual machine that's logged in a different location, located someplace else. So it should trigger enough of a different behavior to bump my score up. But just in case, we're going to say basically if the score is above 25. If I did minimum, be above 50. If I did high, be above 75. So we're going to go for the low here. And we're going to click save. So again, in real life, if I set it to low, that means my users would probably get denied a lot more often than I really want, unless I'm always expecting them to really log in from the same place around the same time, same machines, etc. So depends upon your users and what you expect to be their typical behavior. So I am doing it again at this low level because I really want to make sure I'm triggering a score to demonstrate smart access, denying access. So we're going to do that, as I said, from a virtual machine. Got this VM running in AWS. It's actually located over on the East Coast. I am physically located on the West Coast of the United States. So different physical location. It's going to be a different IP address. I'm using Internet Explorer here. So I got even another different browser. So we're going to go log in again as ransomware. Prompted for password. And type in the correct password. That will make our lives easier. Now, it's going to prompt me for MFA. I expect that behavior. And got kind of locked out really quickly. Let me send the push notification there. There we go. All right, we've accepted that, but dun, da, 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 access was denied. That is smart access at work. Why is smart access at work? Because we bumped up my risk score high enough. Let's go check it out. Let's go to my event viewer and see what the score was. In fact, it was 50. Okay, so again, me setting that risk level tolerance for smart access down to low is a decent enough call because this behavior only bumped it up to 50. I had logged in from that machine a couple of times, or that location a couple of times, so it should have been actually higher. You can see some earlier attempts here. But really wanted to make sure there that we got that demonstration of it denying me access, which we did. Okay, so again, idea, smart access, if the risk score is above the defined threshold based upon the chosen risk level, login attempt totally denied. If it is below, that's where smart MFA can come into play. If it's below a particular risk level, again, I might suppress MFA. Somewhere in between, I'm going to be prompted for MFA. Okay? You don't have to use both, obviously. You choose what makes sense for your environment. As we already mentioned, smart access can be enabled on a per application basis by using app policies. Here, we can see an app policy with smart access enabled at a high risk level. The behavior will be similar to what we just looked at. When the risk score is over 50, access will be denied to whatever application this app policy is applied to. You can apply the same policy to multiple applications. All you have to do is choose the policy from the App Policy dropdown on the App's Access tab. As we see here, we're looking at a Salesforce app connector, and on the Access tab, there's a policy dropdown. Whatever app policies we've defined will be available in the drop. This concludes Part 1 of implementing SmartFactor Authentication. Please continue on to Part 2 so you can see how smart flows work.
This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.